Welcome back to In the Works, the show where we update you guys on what's going on around here at the shop and what we're working on. Now, this episode's going to be just a little bit different.
Yes, it has been exactly 1 year since we moved to this new location and we finally settled in. And we finally finished a very important episode that will air next week. And I've been working on this specific episode for the past several months because it's a very time-consuming type of project. It could not have been done within the quick time frame. And the project was Tanjiro's Nichiren blade, the Black Katana. And as always, katanas take an enormous amount of time, and that's why I cannot work on some parts of it when I'm doing other forging, like hammers to sell. And for example, if I'm working on the katana, I can't work on other stuff because it requires a full focused mind.
And that's right, not only do katanas take a long time to make, but we also had to make some tools just to be able to make that build come to life, such as the charcoal forge behind me.
And here it is, the new hoodie.
That's right.
Check these out.
Slav life, Ilya's finally got around to designing a t-shirt slash hoodie design that he can be proud of. So there
Yes.
it is.
And here it is. The project I've been working on for several months. I finally finished it. The new hoodie design.
True story, he sent me the worst scribbles and scrabble design.
I might have had moonshine that day.
But we made it happen. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool t-shirt. We have that and other t-shirts on thatworks.shop. Check them out if you're interested in such things.
Now, let's move on to the main course. The project that basically celebrates 1 full year of us being in this shop is this. It might be familiar to some people, it might not be. I will not disclose what it is, although I can. But let's keep it simple. It should be fairly well recognizable.
That's right, we finally got around to doing a katana project on That Works, and we did it for you. How many months did it take you to make that?
I started somewhere in April. But the reason is you can't work on these projects when you're working on other forging or let's say I'm focused on having the exact type of hada that I need. That means my mind has to be completely focused on that. In fact, the presence of the camera is fairly detrimental to the process anyway. So that slows me down. And I also need to earn money, means I have to make tongs and hammers and knives and other swords. And if that is on my mind, I cannot work on something serious like these pieces. And the fact of the matter is, these swords are these types of swords are fairly unique in world history in that they are embedded in a highly literate tradition where everything is designed to push the craftsman to the heights of excellence.
Yeah.
There's not much room for interpretation in the same, because there are traditional guidelines, there are religious guidelines, as well as there are guidelines of a strict sense of taste and refinement. So like with European swords, you can do pretty much anything and it will still look like a European sword. With these things, you will look like a buffoon if you stray away too far from the tradition.
Yeah. So the approach we basically took over the last 6 months or so of making this is every time we were doing a different build, we would do some pickup shots. Ilya would say, we're making Damascus today, so let me do some more folds for the katana. So we would do that, we'd do some folds, we'd go back, we'd make things like the spear.
And to be honest, so the blade for the katana has been made by, let's say, end of April, beginning of May or so,
Yeah.
right? But the filming of the folds was not necessarily always for this specific blade because I have other Japanese style projects. So we filmed, let's say I'm making a yari. The folding is the same material, it looks the same. So we picked up another part of the process that is the same as this blade.
Yeah.
But from there, let's say, for example, this blade is contaminated with meteorite because my tekokani, the holding stick which is forge welded onto the billet, has a lot of meteorite in it. my subsequent projects have less and less meteorite in them because the Tekokani, amount of meteorite in it is reduced. So this has, you know, sky steel in it. I never intended it to have sky steel, but it does. Now the other thing is, let's say making the fittings or wrapping the handle. That part is also of critical importance, and that is made like this entire thing and this have completely been made on camera. Another thing is that this is the first time I attempted a two-part habaki, so I'm very excited how the footage turned out for that. It's a fairly complicated Lego-like habaki.
Yeah. I mean, our approach with this build, if you've seen some of Ilya's katanas that we've made on some other video projects for TV and other YouTube channels, we're usually really heavy on the forging and the heat treat and things like the claying and all that kind of stuff. But this time we really wanted to kind of take a step and not cheat you guys on some of the finer work that goes into a Japanese sword like this. So it's going to be a lot more of the habaki making, the suba, the everything. I mean, every piece we're going to show every step of the way. There's no like jump to the next thing and all of a sudden this exists. We're going to show at least a little bit of everything and give a pretty good idea of what you'd need to learn if you were interested in making one yourself. However, we're not necessarily teaching you how to do it in this video. Right?
Yeah, you probably should go to school for that. There's an actual school for katana making.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited just to finally have this video wrapped and just be able to show it to you guys. I still honestly have a little...
say, Ilya, shut up, we're done.
We did it. It's been a long time coming, and it's just really nice to make a video, even if this wasn't a katana, of a piece of work that at least one of us is truly proud of, and it's not like a 3-day rush job to get it done where we know there's lots of mistakes. Honestly, this is what it should be. It's a little nicer than the one from the anime, in my opinion, but
there's room for stylization in anime. Yeah. They always stylize what the object is supposed to look like to make it more recognizable on screen. For example, in the anime, the Ito wrap is much looser, so the Ito cord has to be this wide in order for it to look exactly like the anime. The Ito cord that size does not exist and will not fit through these holes. So obviously I had to make a real katana, or rather make the real life katana from which the manga would have been drawn. Think of it the following way, right? So anime faces or manga faces look very unlike what a real life face looks, right? And you can't say, oh, you're not that character because your eyes are not the size of, you know, like coffee plates.
Yeah.
No, there's stylization. That's why it's called art. So I brought it back from stylization and put it within the parameters of an established set of proportions, so on and so forth. And here it is. There are a couple other additions like Minuki. I've never seen a katana without Minuki. So I made Minuki but hid them. Normally on this wrap they would be here, but I hid them and matched the color of the ray skin to the color of the Minuki. So that you have to look for them to see them, so we're not too far away from the anime and yet not too far away from the way I understand these swords.
Yeah, and it's not like this is a unique thing. Like, pretty much one of the biggest struggles we have in making things from a cartoon, whether it's anime, video games, you know, comic book, whatever, is trying to bring something that's very, like, might just be the color orange on the handle, and knowing that that's got to be a brown leather wrap with something, or an piece of antler. Like, you have to have that skill of being able to go from a really kind of washed over detailed item into what it would look like in real life. And sometimes we make it look cartoony, but most of the time I think we do a pretty good job. And one of the things that we always find is like the handles on swords in animes and video games are always round, so we slightly ovate them, things like that. So that there's always different things.
On this one it isn't. So, well, actually, here's the thing, a peculiar thing when you watch anime, because the absolute majority of anime is made in Japan, the way Japanese people perceive swords, when they even draw a European sword, very often they just draw a double-edged katana with weird fittings. They have the habaki, the handle is weird, the pommel is weird, all of it is weird. Why? Because this is how the katana means longsword. That's what it means.
Like
so,
the Dragon Ball Z sword has
correct.
a habaki. You know, it's a Western European blade. It has a habaki and a very angled and kind of, you know, Japanese style point to it. It's like
so that's another thing.
It's what a sword is to them, so that's how they draw it.
So this piece is actually fairly interesting in the sense that this type of tsuba is the Buddhist wheel, so it's the wheel of Dharma, so the cyclical nature of life and death, and rebirth. So like people just think it's kind of a simple tsuba. No, it actually has meaning, and if people are watching the show or reading manga, the wheel of Dharma is fairly important considering that they're dealing with the idea of life and death and rebirth even as something else. And it's a constant feature in Eastern traditions, the persistence through time or impermanence, the duality between the two. And a lot of people don't notice these things that when they make, oh, this is just a guard. It's never just a guard. It's never just a minuki. It's never just this. It's always part of some larger whole where all the parts somehow relate to each other.
Alright, so that's a lot about the katana build that we have coming out next week. But right now what we want to do is let you guys know that we have some available, very nice products on our website right now, thatworks.shop. I have this Damascus axe. If you guys have seen one of our recent videos where I forged an axe very similar, this is actually the predecessor. This was kind of the proof of concept for that video. I made this one first and then handled them together. I did a little more fancy work on the handle itself, but this one is based off of a Gotland Viking axe find. It's kind of my interpretation of it, but it's Damascus, same thing, 300 layers, just like the one in the video. It's got carving on the blade. So this is available, and Ilya has a nice sword that he just made.
Boom! So this is a leaf blade, all Damascus. This is about 720 layered Damascus billet. And the blade is 29 inches long and it is 39 inches overall. Now,
hey, have you ever done stuff on film? Do you like always hold stuff right in front of your face when you're talking?
I don't think this is a vlog.
Oh, okay, cool.
This is a vlog. So,
all right, that's good. Pro.
So the blade is 29 inches long and overall this is 39 inches. Now, fittings are wrought iron with silver caps here. One thing, you've been watching me make it on my live stream, or make piece. I can't guarantee that it was the same exact piece on my live stream.
Your live stream? Where do you catch that?
Go to Instagram and subscribe to Slavic Smith. Follow me. And occasionally when I feel like it, I do a live stream. And I show you how if I'm working on a sword, I show you, okay, this is how we punch the hole for the tang and the shoulder. This entire shape is forged. I punched a square hole in the pommel, so on and so forth.
Alright, I think we should go ahead and put these away.
I win.
Wow.
And we don't always do this, but sometimes, even if they're not framed quite well, people ask legitimate questions or pose legitimate complaints in our YouTube comments section. Now, you might say that this is ill-advised to reply to people who leave a comment on YouTube. However, in the talk about crucible steel, bloomery steel, so on and so forth, someone watched the video and asked or posed several objections, which I would like to address in part given the fact that to fully answer them requires a giant library and constant citations. I'm just going to reply briefly.
Alright. So the gentleman's name, I assume a gentleman, I do not know, is Riastrad. And he says, yeah, ... no. What a great way to start.
It's certainly
He
wins
has
me over.
quite a list from 1 to 7. We're probably not going to touch on all of them, but as Ilya said, we actually do read the comments and we do care. And if we've made a mistake, we'd like to go ahead and address it. And if we haven't made a mistake, we'd like to try to reiterate or readdress some of those points. His first says, 1. Blacksmiths were held in very high regard in medieval Europe. There was even a holy day dedicated to Saint Clement, the patron saint of blacksmiths, complete with its own distinct rituals and festivals rooted in the celebration of the smithing craft. So not only does your Cain and Abel theory have no historical basis, it directly contradicts the historical evidence.
Fortunately enough, that is identical to saying that fishermen were highly regarded, or rather were of high status in medieval Europe, because there was a holy day dedicated to fishermen and with a full plethora of according rituals and practices.
So you might have a fair point, but you went about it the wrong way, that's for sure. Number 2, nowhere was the blacksmith's art more highly developed than in Western Europe. The technological and aesthetic refinement of the European plate harness by far more advanced than any extant example from Japanese metalwork, including the swords of great Japanese smiths, should only alone be proof of that. Why would the superiority be limited only to the production of armor and not also manifest in the forging of weapons?
The last point should actually be assigned to my response. You see, an armorer is not a blacksmith. Let's say I take an example. One of the most famous armorers who is famous for making exquisite pieces is Filippo Negroli, who lived in the second half of the 1500s and influenced a lot of the subsequent styles. Now, he started out as a silversmith. Let's take another armorer, Helmschmidt, who worked for the Habsburg family. Now, he comes indeed from a long line of armorers, and armorers are not blacksmiths. The way an armorer goes about making armor, he buys pre-flattened, rough pieces of sheet from someone else. And they're rough, they're not even, and he, with a bunch of assistants, makes armor. In fact, it is very likely that someone else forms the rough shape of the helmet, and then the actual final master comes and completes it. Didn't we go to an armor event?
Yes, we did.
That was dedicated in part to researching that thing?
Yeah.
The video will come at some point later. Now, the interesting part about that is that armorers, surprisingly enough, were highly literate. Armorers, and I mentioned this in my talk on boob armor, armorers were in correspondence with people like Leonardo da Vinci. In fact, Albrecht Dürer was great friends with an armorer who lived down the street, and Michelangelo too was a great friend with an armorer. Notice that they were not great friends with blacksmiths, they were friends with armorers. And an armorer does not have the same skill set as a bladesmith. And once again, a bladesmith is not a blacksmith. Those are different sets. Here's an example, moving through analogy. If you have a toothache, you don't go to a spinal injury surgeon, right? Or if you have a pimple on your face, you don't go to a who is responsible for cancer?
I don't know. Cigarettes?
That's funny.
Oh.
You don't go to someone who will assign you chemotherapy,
Sure.
so on and so forth. So a blacksmith is not making knives and not making swords. What a blacksmith does, it is a very high art in Europe, but in the final outcome, like nice railings, horseshoes, chandeliers, tongs. A bladesmith forges out the blade. That's it. And a bladesmith actually tends to be not very literate. Then the grinder grinds out the blade. We observed many nice examples of European swords where the fullers were going this way, indicating a general lack of care for the art of making the blade, while a great amount of care, true blacksmithing art, has been spent on making the fittings, like
Gold engraving. Yeah.
even the swept hilt of the Swiss saber.
Yeah.
The blade itself is actually not as nice as you might think. Most mid-range modern blade makers would make a better sword blade, but very few modern makers will make a better hilt. And that indicates that the culture of appreciating the blade itself in its own worth did not exist in Europe, and that had some advantages in Europe. If you don't focus on your craft as if it is a dedicated art, you're much freer to experiment with various different shapes because you're not committed to perfecting either one of them.
I like it. I mean, that answer alone could be a whole video, but let's go ahead and move on to another question. I mean, another statement from this here person. Number 3, you, sir, are comparing the creme de la creme of Japanese swords to munitions grade European swords. There's no doubt that Japanese Nihato were developed to a very high level aesthetic beauty and refinement, but better than that of the highest quality European swords? Question mark? Not by my estimation. The finest examples of European swordsmiths' crafts, perhaps the swords of Central Europe in the latter Middle Ages and the Renaissance, surpass anything crafted by the Japanese smith in the same time period. I kind of think it's the same answer.
The answer is not the same because the valuative question is different. So, what do you define as the best sword? If you're a modern person, you look for how practical it is, so how efficiently it kills. Well, a sharpened ruler kills just about the same as the best sword because human beings are very soft. If you're talking about the best in terms of how long it is or how complicated the cross-section is, maybe. But you see, in my hand, I have an antique Japanese sword by Ominokami Hisamichi, and this will be a great example. The Japanese sword tradition comes out of the literate arts of calligraphy and ink painting. And the reason why these don't look very ornate is because the idea of ink painting where every single brushstroke is visible to the person appreciating is an integral part of these swords. By looking at the steel, you see the mood, the care, and even the, let's say, well, definitely that artistic refinement and how closely a person was following this or that tradition. You will be able to, by looking at 1 square inch of blade, identify the smith, their school, how good they were, because this is viewed as high-end calligraphy. Do not look at it as a weapon, but think of it as closer to Picasso's Guernica, as closer to Rembrandt, things of that nature. Why? Because those are the criteria that are placed on a Japanese sword maker to be a high-level artist. When you're looking at a European sword, the polish is not equivalent to this. Since the 11th century, the appraising of the sword based on the polish alone, notice not the etching of the steel to show it, but the polish already exists, 11th century. So it's 1,000 years ago, basically. That means that there was tremendous pressure placed on the craftsman to not make mistakes because the polish will reveal it. Such pressure does not exist in Europe, and that is why when Matt and I go to museums, a lot of European longswords are bent like that or have file marks that existed on the blade, file marks, since the moment it was made. Why? Because there was no pressure of appreciating the steel for its aesthetic properties. And aesthetic properties are different from fanciness, how fancy it is. Those two things are different. One is high art, and the other one is marketing. Okay, I'm currently, while Matt is reading, sending him a picture of a sword of one of French kings where if you look down the blade, the entire thing is crooked this way, but it's gilt with gold, so it was crooked as they were gilting it and Damascening it.
Right. So they're adding all that fanciness to the
Knowing that
blade
it's crooked.
that's poopy, and everybody could see it, but it is what it is. And once again, we don't want to like sit here and say like the katana would beat a Western European sword and the samurai is better than the knight. Well, that's not what the argument was in the video whatsoever. It was...
The argument is two. Like, one is better as a work of art, as a painting, because the other one was never intended to be a painting.
Yeah.
And two, metallurgically speaking, there are less negative contaminants in Japanese steel because of pressure over time to perfect that compared to Europe, because when your pressure is refine the tradition versus innovate, whatever you're refining will be better compared to any instance of that innovation until the industrial era.
All right. So that was point number 3, and he goes on to make a lot of other points, some about Muslims, all kinds of different things.
I think the comment of that Arabs, how Arabs describe European swords, I addressed in the very same video.
You literally did. So let's go ahead and jump to one of your favorite things. Now, he doesn't really give any great insight into why he says this, but he says, your claims about literacy rates are easily disproved and have been elsewhere in this comments section. Now, you didn't make those up.
No. To check literacy rates, I went on Google Scholar. That is a specific part of Google that publishes peer-reviewed academic articles. And the rough estimate, the aggregate of this approximations of what the literacy rate in Europe was, is 80% of Europeans were illiterate in medieval Europe. It was about that. So the number might vary depending on who conducts the research. And whether you include nobility or not. Actually, I think it was 80% of nobility was illiterate.
Yeah, I think it was.
And we're not even talking about peasants. And in Edo, Japan, which is a little bit after medieval time, it's about 80% of people living in cities were literate. Now, yes, you can argue that in this particular place, the church educated people better, so more people were literate. The thing is, blacksmiths, or swordsmiths, not the grinders, not the jewelers, not the designers, not the armorers, the bladesmiths and blacksmiths, tended to be either peasantry or citizens. They're not nobility, they're not the knightly class. They're not the merchants. Merchants tended to be literate, surprisingly enough.
I think, I mean, like guys like this who have responded, there's been some other comments in that video. I think guys like this don't have, are looking at the craft as like blacksmith is all encompassing. So like that's part of the problem of understanding a lot of what Ilya is trying to say.
It's a very modern problem.
Yeah, because and TV honestly doesn't help anything, because we watch like Forge and Fire, and we watch different TV shows that have people who move metal, and no matter what, if you swing a hammer and move metal, your title on the screen will be Ilya Alekseyev, blacksmith. And
I'm not a blacksmith.
Though
I've never claimed to be a blacksmith.
You do blacksmithing, that's certainly not a blacksmith. I can do some blacksmithing. I am most certainly not a blacksmith. It's a problem in the terminology that it's hard to translate when you're then going back in time and talking about things, because there were very specific things. And we didn't put that video out to like piss people off. We knew that some people would be upset by it, but that's kind of why we want to go back and talk about it. And I think honestly that topic, and maybe expanded upon a little bit, does necessarily deserve a round two.
It does. I will dig up the photographs of, let's say, Viking blades that have a hamon in them, for example. So they have the same quality, functional qualities as a katana. So
Yeah.
they're kind of hard on the edge, but they'll bend and a lot of them were bent too. I have a paper that analyzes medieval European swords that basically do the hardness test from the edge to the center, and the hardness on the edge is about 45 Rockwell max, and in the center it's 28 Rockwell, meaning it either has a hamon or the center is made out of iron, meaning it's not springy, it will take a set. And that's the general case. The general case with Japanese swords is a little bit different, although functionally it is very important for people who are studying European swords to actually study the Japanese traditions, because it is the only extant continuous example of working with a primitive steel to a high level. And most European swords would have been made in a very, very, very similar fashion to the way katanas are made, except they're double-edged or different shaped blades. But metallurgically, from the standpoint of 1 square inch of blade, what does that thing look like? They would be very similar. My argument is, because I have an art background and a philosophy background, is twofold. From the standpoint of an aesthetic cultural tradition, the Japanese tradition is more sophisticated because it was designed to be, because of the position of the sword in that tradition.
Yeah.
It is beyond, it's beyond a functional piece. It is a matter of literacy. The sword is a way of conveying an idea to another literate person. In Europe, it's not as much the same. When you buy a Japanese sword, you just buy the blade. That's
Right.
it. So you should be able to appreciate the blade. With Europe, it is not quite the same. But from the standpoint of what made those swords work and what you can expect out of them in terms of performance, when they would break, when they would bend, when they would cut, when they would thrust, it is very valuable to a researcher of European swords to study the Japanese tradition. My end goal from my entire body of research, and I've spoken about this to Matt, is the following. You take any authentic Japanese blade and you give it to an expert, hiding the tang, the signature, and they will be able to date the piece just by looking at the steel and name the person or school that did it within a decade or so, give or take.
Pretty incredible.
Pretty incredible. Now, Europe never had the tradition, but because the material is very similar up until, let's say, the 1700s or so, you can adapt, because the skills are transferable, a similar appraising tradition to authenticating European swords. That is, all of a sudden, you will be able to date Katzbalgers just by a broken piece of blade to a town and a decade where it was made, and even maybe through church records be able to identify the smith that forged out the blade. Probably not the grinder that ground it, but you will be able to find similarities that are a product of a person's excellence within the given field, given the parameters of that field.
Yes.
So if I upset you with my claims and saying katana is great, katana is amazing. Why? Because it has the tradition of seeing it as an art which created an appraisal and authentication tradition that is unique in the world and is valuable to people who are researching European swords, because there's something to borrow there. There's a way forward with authenticating, appraising, and recategorizing European swords based on something more than the general shape of the blade. Because a lot of times with European swords, you take an old blade, regrind it, and remount it as something different. Let's say William Wallace's sword is like that. It's probably fake. A lot of European swords are fake and are passed as real, even by museums, simply because we don't have an authentication tradition like Japan does. and we probably should, as a community of people who kind of care about research, try to push for something like that. And that's why I'm always saying, let's study katanas, because they have that.
Sure. And you know, this is a hard segue, but we do want to go ahead and say thank you to commenters like Riastrad and other people who have given well thought out comments. This guy obviously wasn't trying to pick a fight and just be a troll and say that we're wrong. Maybe he was, but he gave some thought out things, and he obviously did a little bit of research. We appreciate those we read those comments. We aren't going to make a video dedicated to responding to every single one of them, but we do try to respond to those in the comments. So if you do have a point where you disagree or you agree, whatever it is, you can go ahead in the comment section of any of our videos, comment it, we will see it, we will read it, and we will try to get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Now I want to take a quick second and thank one of the most important things that allows us to have not only this channel, but to function as craftsmen, take a break from making products and make videos for you guys, and that is our shop sponsors. We are sponsored by Red Label Abrasives. If you guys have a 2x72 or any size grinder, you should be using Red Label. They are not only the best belts out there, they have the best customer service. Speaking of 2x72 grinders, we are also sponsored by Broadbeck Ironworks. They make a kit grinder that comes in a box that you put together yourself. It is an outstanding grinder. They have probably the most innovative attachments that go on there, so you can just boom, boom, boom.
And they're releasing soon the surface grinder, if they haven't released it yet.
Yeah, that's coming out, and there's pre-orders. Those should be hitting, so that's pretty cool. You don't
be
have
on the
to,
lookout.
You don't have to have a whole nother machine to surface grind whatever you're doing right on your grinder. So it's kind of made for people who have a smaller shop. You get an all-in-one tool that has lots of different capabilities. So
Lincoln Electric.
Lincoln Electric, all of our welding gear, our plasma cutters, all that stuff is Lincoln Electric. We highly recommend going out and getting their products. We use one of the lowest end welders they have, the FC90, very affordable. It's $100. You can get it at Home Depot. We use it all the time, welding things here and there. It's great. It's flux core, no need for gas. Highly recommend.
Chris was welding the shop building.
That's right. We're building a new shop. We use the FC90 a lot of the times to weld different parts together out there. Highly recommend all Lincoln Electric products, but that is a great starter welder. We get asked all the time what starter tools for people getting into the craft, and the FC90 is a great starter. Not only that, we're also sponsored by Harris Torches. The Harris Torch, look, I came from a background where my brother used to always get these like yard sale style torches. I never even knew what a nice torch was. We got our Harris Torch. Easy, quick change tips. We can go
powerful. Oh, it's
finesse.
like hold my beer powerful.
You'll see in the Katana video that Ilya uses a Harris torch. He doesn't even bother to put the small torch head on to do all the soldering. He just turned
I'm lazy.
it down.
Honestly, I'm lazy.
He just turned the flame down and went at it. So he was soldering silver with a bigger torch head. They're very versatile. They're very, very, very high quality. We're also sponsored by Even Heat. We have a very nice, I think it's a 49 inch even heat kiln that we're starting to use more and more. Honestly, when we first got it, we thought we would use it for like things like titanium and like H13 that have very specific heat soak times and temperatures you got to hit. But we're actually using it all the time now. It's a great oven to heat treat, to temper, everything.
When I make a batch of hammers, I
stick them all in.
Stick them all in to temper, and that's it. So there's like 20 pounds or more of material. Stick it in, dial in the number, walk away. I know my hammers will not crack. They will all be evenly tempered because it's even heat. And all I have to do is clean them up, handle them, and they're good to go. We also use them for our swords when you want a sword from us and you don't have the budget to do the charcoal heat treat that is primitive and super traditional. If you want a functional sword for martial arts, even if it's a fancy functional sword, even heat is the solution, because what the customer wants, the customer gets.
Now, one thing I also want to bring up is I kind of enjoy looking at the analytics of our channel. I've noticed that a huge majority of the people that watch our major build videos are not subscribed. So if you're watching this video right now and you notice that you haven't subscribed to That Works, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a lot. You'll get the notifications where you won't miss any videos, and it feels good. We like subscribers. We like people. We like
subscribe.
We like videos being seen, and we make these videos for you guys, so why miss out on them when you can just hit that subscribe button and make sure you see every single one.
Indeed. Well, I think that's it for today.
I think so.
And stay tuned for the next major build video.
That's right. Don't forget, in just a couple days, you're going to see us make the first katana here on That Works. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button. Tell us in the comments below, did you like this style of video? You want to see more podcast style talks between me and Ilya? Perhaps we can get Chris involved, or not.
Guests.
Or other guests. It's something that we've kind of considered doing, a podcast style video series. The only fear was that it might become the focus because it might be very popular, and then we're sitting around talking all the time.
It will not be popular.
Well, tell us in the comments if you enjoyed this. If you don't want to comment that, tell us what you want to see us build next, because we're always making new stuff for you here on That Works. Thanks, and we'll catch you guys next time.